Ukraine says it will not accept any deal that crosses its red lines as officials work to study a US-backed peace proposal to end the war. Now, the EU has said it will continue to support any peace plan involving Kyiv and the bloc.
We are supportive of any plan that brings about just and lasting peace. As for the peace plan we understand that President Zelensky has been presented with, we have always said that any peace plan to work, it has to be with Ukraine and with the Europeans on board.
A verified draft obtained by several media outlets outlines 28 points within the US proposal, including territorial concessions. The plan calls on Kyiv to cede the entire Donbas region. The proposal also mentions the US will recognize Crimea, Luhansk, Donetsk as Russian territory. The draft also proposes Kyiv to downsize its military to 600,000 personnel. It also wants Ukraine to agree not to join NATO. The plan cites, I quote, reliable security guarantees provided for Kyiv, though no details were given. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he is ready to work with the US on the proposal. He's expected to discuss the plan with his US counterpart Donald Trump in the coming days. Now, the Kremlin says the US has yet to discuss the new peace plan in detail with Moscow, but called on the Ukrainian leader to negotiate now or lose more territory. And Jagruti Dave is covering this story for CNA, and she joins us live now from Washington, D.C. Now, Jagruti, what are the possible sticking points now with this peace plan?
Well, listen, this is just a draft, but I mean, based on this, I think you mentioned several of the sticking points. One of those would be that the plan would force Kyiv to give up territory in the east. One of its red lines was that Donbas region. It would have to agree to limit its military presence, and it would have to refuse it would not have Western peacekeeping forces in the country after a peace plan was agreed to. They would also have to refuse to join NATO. So these are some of the sticking points that Ukraine has been very adamant against. So there's questions about how much they would accept a peace like this, whether this would be a just and lasting peace that the Ukrainians have called for. There's also questions about whether this peace plan had in fact had much Ukrainian involvement in the first place. There's indications that this was hammered out by Steve Witkoff, Trump's envoy, and his Russian counterpart, who was in Miami for 3 days, where they were reportedly discussing this plan. On the other hand, you've got the issue of Moscow, whether Moscow is going to even accept this, because, you know, Moscow is saying that they haven't received the plan yet. They aren't even in discussion stages. There's contacts are being made, as Dmitry Peskov has put it. But, you know, given how much Russia has prevaricated in the past over coming to end its war in Ukraine, there's questions about whether it will accept anything other than, you know, full capitulation from Ukraine. And then on the other side, of course, you have the European Union, who has a big stake in this, but who also appear not to have been consulted for the initial drafting of this plan. When they have discussions with Volodymyr Zelensky later on, they're going to be discussing this. How much are they going to accept of this draft? And how much of this draft is going to go forward and make a final cut if that stage is in fact reached?
Yeah, Jagruti, how does this then differ from the previous proposals? And what does it tell us now about Washington's stance on the war?
I think one of the things that is very different about this is really the speed and urgency that's coming from Washington. They're working to what's being called an aggressive timeline here. You know, in previous instances, there have been attempts to get both sides sat at the table. There have been discussions mediated by the United States and Turkey in Istanbul, but they haven't really led to anything other than the exchange of prisoners of war. And so this plan is very much, I think, in a sense that Washington is just getting increasingly frustrated by the fact that this war appears not to be ending anytime soon. And they're, you know, officials in Washington are really trying to put pressure, you know, on Russia with sanctions. But as we've just discussed, this plan appears to read a little bit like a wish list for Moscow. But on the other hand, there's pressure on Ukraine as well. It's Volodymyr Zelensky is looking at yet another corruption scandal engulfing his government. And a lot of goodwill from the United States is lost for giving weapons to Ukraine. And so I think there's a sense that, Donald Trump, who's long said that he could end the war just like that, is really now just pushing for any kind of deal to be signed. That seems to be what the chatter is about this particular peace plan and the speed with which Washington appears to be moving to try to get this done.
Yeah, Jagruti, thank you so much for getting us up to speed. That was Jagruti Dave reporting live from Washington, D.C.